Before concluding, it is right that I highlight the amendments tabled by the Right Honourable Lady, the Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee in respect to the infected blood inquiry. I've considered very carefully what she said. She will appreciate what she's tabled. She will appreciate, of course, this is a matter for the Cabinet Office. I wanted to acknowledge the huge impact that scandal has had on people, on families, on individuals up and down this country in my opening remarks. I don't propose to say much more than that at this point, because I want to come to those in some detail when I've heard what the Right Honourable Lady says in moving her amendments and in proposing them. And I've sought to be, I'm afraid, and I'm grateful to the House for its indulgence, as comprehensive as I can be in my opening remarks, to leave time in my closing remarks to address specific points on that issue and others.
I turn now, Mr Deputy Speaker, to new clauses 27 and 42. New clause 42, which stands in my name, and new clause 27, which stands in the name of my honourable friend, the member for Kingston upon Hull North. And I want to pay tribute to her for her incredible campaigning on this matter over many, many years, and the other members who've campaigned alongside her. We've all been moved by the appalling infected blood tragedy, and in the Labour Party we want to help ensure that justice and compensation for victims and their families is delivered, and delivered urgently. And I applaud the campaigning and advocacy organisations alongside the APPG on haemophilia and contaminated blood, who've worked so tirelessly to secure justice. It's an issue that spanned many years, several parliaments, with the former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead, setting up this inquiry. And many members and former members, including people like Andy Burnham and the current Chancellor of the Exchequer, when they were Health Secretaries, advocating for such an independent inquiry. The government's already accepted, I believe, that there's a moral case for compensation, and the interim payments to a number of victims is an important recognition of that. And I'm sure that the Minister has seen the letter that the Shadow Chancellor wrote over the weekend to the Chancellor of the Exchequer on this matter. So this bill and new clause 27 provide a chance to show that the Commons supports the principle of delivering a compensation scheme and understands the urgency to deliver justice. There's also an amendment in my name in relation to this, Mr Deputy Speaker, new clause 42, which would establish a deadline of 25 sitting days between the publication of the final report on infected blood and an oral statement to this House setting out how victims will be able to access the scheme and what steps will be taken to establish a compensation body. I hope the government will accept both of those new clauses tonight. The aim is to ensure the government moves urgently after the final report is published. The vote this evening is an important opportunity, and we're willing to work with the government, Mr Deputy Speaker, in order to ensure that a fair scheme can be set up and administered quickly. And there's time between the bill going to the Lords also for us to work further on that. It's a hugely complex matter. We're keen to work on a cross-party basis to shape a final compensation scheme that can deliver justice urgently. And of course we await the final findings of the independent infected blood inquiry chaired by Sir Brian Langstaff. However, there's no reason for the government not to move forward on this issue, especially as the King's Speech committed to action. I will, of course, give way to my honourable friend.
Honourable friend, and is he as surprised as I am that the government are saying it's not possible to make payments at this time or to set up a compensation scheme because we haven't got the final report, when actually they're already doing that for the Post Office Horizon scandal, where they're making payments ahead of the final report of that public inquiry?
Yes, and I think the answer to that, and the last line of that intervention is, so what's the difference here? And it's a very, very pertinent question, which I know the Minister will want to answer when he gets the dispatch box to reply to the debate later on. I also wish to pay tribute to Sir Brian Langstaff and the inquiry for the work their team has been doing and their unstinting commitment to deliver justice for those infected. And I would be grateful if the Minister could update the House on what work the government's been doing since the publication of the report. I accept that it's part of the Cabinet Office responsibility, but it sits with us this evening, and of course governments are supposed to be joined up. I know the House would also be grateful for an update on the expected timing of publication of Sir Brian's final report. It's an issue that affects members from across the House, and in that spirit, let's try to rise to the occasion and find a way to work constructively on a cross-party basis, but crucially at speed. But to be clear, I urge my honourable friends to support my honourable friends' new clause this evening, should it be moved to a division later on this evening.
Front bench SNP, Chris Stevens.
Well, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the chair of the Justice Select Committee, of which I am now a recent member, and I look forward to working with him in that regard. As this bill, Mr Deputy Speaker, it covers most of the devolved competencies, I'm going to confine my observations, you'll be pleased to hear, to one topic, and that is the amendments tabled by the Honourable Member for Kingston upon North, and to explain why the Scottish National Party will be supporting the amendments in that regard for this bill. It should be noted, Mr Deputy Speaker, that over 140 members of this House have signed that amendment, representing every single political affiliation represented in this House, and I think that shows the strength of feeling that there is within the House. And that is, of course, Mr Deputy Speaker, because of the concerns I think many of us have had that the Government, in discussing this issue, since the issue of compensation was considered by Sir Brian Langstaff, that we've had written statements that seem to sneak out at recesses or even before prorogation, which don't give members of this House the opportunity to raise on the floor of this House questions to the Government and the Cabinet Office. We've heard this phrase, working at pace, Mr Deputy Speaker. Well, I can only think that I did refer a couple of weeks ago to snail's pace, but I'm starting to think that the old story about the race between the hare and the tortoise, that the tortoise has already alerted the Cabinet Office in relation to pace in dealing with this particular issue. And that is a very real frustration, because I do want to pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Kingston upon Hull North, who has led the All-Party Parliamentary Group as co-chair with distinction, and I thank her for raising and bringing forward these amendments tonight. And it's a pleasure to serve with her as one of the vice chairs of that all-party parliamentary group. And I do want to, Mr Deputy Speaker, of course once again pay tribute to Glasgow South West constituents Cathy Young and her daughter Nicola Stewart, who have constantly raised this issue with me on a regular basis to ensure that they get justice. And they deserve justice, Mr Deputy Speaker, because it's those individuals who have cared for loved ones, who put their working careers to the side, who had to keep perhaps their potential academic careers and qualifications to the side in order to care for their loved ones. And it is now time, I believe, for that compensation to be delivered. And I do want to refer to the House of a series of tweets this morning by the Sunday Times political editor Caroline Wheeler as to justifying why these amendments should be raised today. And it is, I think, it's worthwhile reiterating and building on these arguments today, as the Shadow Front Bench did earlier. Sir Brian Langstaff has chastised the Government, telling it there aren't any details, there is no timeline, there is no structure yet in place, and if it troubles my conscience, I would think it would trouble the conscience of a caring Government, and that they have said that that's what they wish to be. So I'm certainly of the view, along with those who are supporting this amendment, that the compensation scheme now needs to be established immediately and begin its work. Now, reference was made, Mr Deputy Speaker, an intervention by the Honourable Member for Kingston upon Hull, that the Government's awarded post office workers who've had wrongful convictions for theft and false accounting overturned, and that the compensation is now being paid whilst the inquiry is still ongoing. But there's yet another example that needs to be raised as to why you can work at pace or meet the demands of the day, and that is that during the pandemic, the Government set up a complex system of payments affecting millions of people under the furlough scheme within days during the pandemic. And those of us who were around at that time were given the opportunity to raise those issues. So if it can be done then, if the political will is there, then the political will should be there for this. And if the Government is not willing to use its political will, it's the responsibility of members of this House to impose our will onto the government to make sure that that happens. Mr Deputy Speaker, justice delayed is justice denied. And we need to remember when considering this issue tonight that 4 victims continue to die every 4 days. And if that doesn't demand quick and immediate action from the government, then I suggest nothing will. And can I also say to them that if they believe for 1 second that delaying this issue and delaying the compensation saves money, then they are completely and utterly wrong, because no money will be saved by delays. Court cases involving the survivors of this scandal will resume within 3 months of the findings of the inquiry being published, and legal costs will be added to what the government will pay. Affected blood survivors should not be considered as something in terms of a spreadsheet, but people whose lives have been torn apart with opportunities denied and livelihoods destroyed. And so therefore, Mr Deputy Speaker, that's why I, my honourable and right honourable friends, will be supporting new Clause 27 tonight. Thank you.
Hear, hear, hear.
Diana Johnson.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I rise to move new Clause 27 and amendments 142, 143 and 144. There will be women and men, children and families in every constituency of this House whose lives have been forever touched by the infected blood scandal of the 1970s and the 1980s. As we've already heard, one person dies on average every 4 days as a result of the scandal, and many of those who've spent decades campaigning for justice are no longer alive. It's almost 8 months now since April this year when Sir Brian Langstaff published the Infected Blood Inquiry's final recommendations on compensation. He stated, "My conclusion is that wrongs were done at individual, collective and systemic levels. And most importantly," and I hope the Minister might just listen to what Sir Brian actually said, "I cannot, in conscience, contribute to that further harm by delaying what I have to say about compensation. This is why I am taking the unusual step of issuing one set of recommendations in advance of all the others at this stage." So Sir Brian has said all he will say on compensation. There is nothing new to learn from the final report, despite the government's protestations. Yet in his summing up on the government's work since April 2023 on responding to his recommendations, Sir Brian told the Prime Minister in July, "There aren't any details, there's no timeline, there's no structure yet in place." And he said this, "If it troubles my conscience, I would think that it would trouble the conscience of a caring government." And you have said that's what you want, you wish to be. So that's why I've tabled these group of amendments this evening, copying Sir Brian Langstaff's recommendations and putting them into these amendments and new clauses. Amendment 142 would extend interim compensation payments to bereaved parents, children and siblings who have lost loved ones as a result of the infected blood inquiry but have never received a penny. Amendment 143 would establish a bespoke psychological service in England for those infected and affected, as already exists in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And Amendment 144 ensures this Act applies to people infected and affected as set out in the second interim report of Sir Brian Langstaff's. Now I want to concentrate my final remarks on new Clause 27, which I will seek to test the opinion of the House on later on, hopefully. 146 honourable and right honourable members have added their names to that amendment, and I'm very grateful for that. 10 political parties at Westminster are represented in that group, and many other members have indicated support. New Clause 27 requires the government to set up the body to deliver compensation payments to people infected and affected by the contaminated blood scandal. Let's not forget that the 5-year infected blood inquiry was due to publish its final report in November last month. So the government told me numerous times that they'd been working at pace to that timeline, told the House this numerous times as well. And so it shouldn't be a problem, should it, for the government, because they've done all this work. They were preparing for the November deadline. But what those infected and affected have been told is that ministers are going to accept a further delay till next March, when Sir Brian publishes his very final comments. But Sir Brian has made it very clear there is nothing else to say on compensation. It was all set out in his April 2023 second interim report. And I also just want to again reiterate this point about the government's approach to the victims of the Post Office Horizon scandal, where victims of that appalling injustice are to be compensated prior to the conclusion of the Post Office Horizon public inquiry. And I would argue that those infected and affected by the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS are equally entitled to compensation before the name plaques come down and the lights go out on the inquiry headquarters, and as Sir Brian envisaged when he wrote in his compensation recommendations in April 2023. Yes, I will give way.
To my honourable friend in giving way, and I fully support her amendment in this regard. I have a constituent which I had to deal with when I first got elected as a Member of Parliament in 2010, and today's bill is from the Justice Department. Justice delayed is justice denied. It is absolutely crucial all victims get treated with parity, and therefore we should not delay any further in making sure they get the justice, and I thank her for her work and support her amendment in this regard.
For those comments, and I think it's important this evening that we show to the government that the will of this Parliament across parties is that that body should be set up to administer compensation payments to start to deliver justice to those infected and affected by the contaminated blood scandal. And I just want to say to the Minister, who I have a great deal of respect for, how disappointing it is that his government is mounting a very hard three-line whip operation to defeat these amendments and new clauses. It is shocking when ministers have stood at that dispatch box and said very clearly that they accept the moral case for compensation. Well, if they accept the moral case for compensation, now is the time. Do the right thing, support new clause 27, and let's get on with this. Let's get justice to these people who have been waiting decades for justice to be delivered.
And I just want to make it clear that this week the Home Office have announced that they're going to put in emergency legislation on the Rwanda situation. Where's our emergency legislation for the things that we have waited years, that people have died waiting for, including those in the blood inquiry? If only we were the emergency.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to speak in support of new clause 27 and hope members opposite support it tonight. In doing so, I'd like to pay tribute to the immense and absolutely tireless campaign and work of my honourable friend, the member for Kingston upon Hull North, who has tabled this today, working with those groups who support the victims of the contaminated blood scandal, who have been so badly let down for so many years and have had to fight just so hard every step of the way. And today is another one of those days. Sir Brian Langstaff has already made his final recommendations on compensation and said a scheme should be set up as soon as possible before the infected blood inquiry reports. He's been crystal clear. There is nothing to wait for. This new clause will do just that, establish a body to make compensation payments to those who are infected and affected. And let's remember, as other members have said, the government are rightly making payments to the victims of the Post Office Horizon scandal before the final report of that public inquiry is out, so we should do so here too. With one victim of the contaminated blood scandal dying on average every 4 days, it's expected that a further 22 victims won't live long enough to see the inquiry's full report published. These people cannot wait any longer for the justice that too many have already been denied. We should vote for them tonight and for those excluded from interim payments. And they are parents and families like the Smiths from my constituency who lost Colin, aged just 7, to AIDS and hepatitis C. I've told his story many times in this place during my time here. Indeed, Colin's father spoke about him very movingly on the Today programme just this morning, and I pay tribute to them. I just do not understand how they continue to do it. As a baby, Colin was infected with factor VIII blood product from sources in Arkansas prison, which his family had to fight to disclose. The loss of employment, the bullying, the abuse, the discrimination the family faced at a time when they had lost their beloved son infected by the NHS. They had to fight every step of the way, whilst watching their friends they met during the campaign die along the way. They keep telling these stories when we have to do so because we have to hear from them, because the government must remember why they must act. And I say that also for Lynn Ashcroft, who lost her husband Bill and after 33 years needs closure. The government have accepted the moral case for compensation, but time is of the essence, and the continued wait for redress just adds to the layers of pain, frustration and injustice the infected and the affected feel. The government must stop dragging its feet. This is a group of people who have had more than enough experience of waiting. In fact, it's been 40 years now since information about the danger of the contaminated blood were published. The best tribute that we can pay this group of people is to make sure that there are absolutely no more delays, and I hope we can do what's right today.
New clause 27 in the name of the honourable member for Kingston upon Hull North. That motion in particular, that amendment in particular, I think has a great deal of support and deserves a great deal of support in this House. Many of us have sat through what seem like endless debates over the past few years, which have seemed never to make the progress that the people affected by the infected blood scandal deserve. And all it asks is that the government implement the recommendations of the interim report. And that doesn't seem an awful lot to ask for an awful lot of people who've suffered far too much already.
I want to speak as well, if I can, to the new clause 27 and commend the Honourable Lady for Kingston and Hull North for her dedicated and committed plan which we're supporting. I hope tonight that we can win that amendment. What bugs me, and probably the Honourable Lady as well, is the fact that government are rightly making payments to the victims of the Post Office Horizon scandal before the final report of that public inquiry is published. An independent into the scandal was due to publish its final report this autumn, but the document will now be published in March 2024. I just find it incredulous that we're letting this go any further. Honestly, Minister, if you're committed to helping the Post Office Horizon scandal, then do the same for the people with the contaminated blood scandal. That's what the Honourable Lady is asking for. It's what I want in this chamber tonight as well. To leave it off to March 24, I think is absolutely disgraceful. The other question I want to ask is, and one matter that always seems to become prominent, is the number of people who have sadly passed away. Asked questions in this last week. So again, with one person affected by this scandal dies every 4 days, I would be greatly concerned that we're not going to have the answers in that as well. Has the Minister had an opportunity to speak to the Department for Health back home in relation to ensuring victims from Northern Ireland can access our compensation in the absence of an assembly? My estimation, Mr Deputy Speaker, is there are 100 victims in Northern Ireland who have had no word whatsoever. They're waiting in this never land where they can't get any help at all. The main priority and point of this is that of urgency. How much longer can we expect victims and their families to wait? The second stage of this inquiry states that the scheme should be set up now and should begin work this year. Who are we in this House to delay it any longer? Commend the Honourable Lady, and I do hope that tonight we push this and win it.